Hello and welcome to TThis. This is our panel discussion show which discusses taboo topics within Black communities. I'm Chantal and I'm joining from BHA today.
And I'm Yvonne, a volunteer, and I'm joining from George House Trust today.
So today is part 2 of a discussion between women who are living with HIV and some who are not living with HIV, and it's a discussion around HIV. So we're going to join from where we finished off on the last discussion and take it from there.
To understand that HIV doesn't discriminate. And I think if we narrow the focus as if there's a problem with talking about us as hard to reach groups, because if you sexualize our behavior, we're not actually looking at the wider picture. So it's about educating women, young girls, into our options and how to negotiate, or even just to think about what sex is safe for me right now, if that makes sense. I don't know what you'd think, Maria, as a woman. What do you think? How do you think about sex, safe sex? I don't know, are you dating even? Is it that kind of thing? Are we out there doing our thing as women?
I'm shocked about all I heard because I thought we were.
Hello?
I thought we knew about this. I thought it was only Portuguese community who had this issue and talking about sex, about HIV. Now what I can see is like all of us are still in the dark age because a lot have been done, but we don't get to know it. It's like the knowledge has been kept for some groups. That's wrong. I don't understand. When I go to my GP, they have, the telly, and they are talking about a lot of, they give us a lot of information there. Why not talking about the PEP in there as well? Why not talk about we as a woman to protect ourselves? I thought we were far more advanced than what I can see now by talking to you girls. I'm seriously, I don't know, it's because my background always was interesting, and to know things, I know it because the way I am, but I thought most of the people know stuff.
And it's not an old or younger generation.
No,
it's still young girl. Because I tell you what I worry about as an older, I'm 57.
Yeah.
I am worried that the young girls now, when I look at TikTok, Facebook and all that, they're so image conscious that would they be confident to say no? Is it just me? And how do we protect the younger women? How do we get the message out to younger women?
I think we have to educate our kids first of all, and maybe ask them to talk about it with their peers as well, because it's like it's kept just some generation. I think our generation, because I'm 44 yesterday, 44.
Happy birthday.
Thank you. And I know this kind of thing because I was that generation that saw it coming. So I still concerned about it. But like I said, it has been put on the background because other diseases are more deadly now, like cancer. And so we heard about a lot about cancer. Now, the latest disease, the virus. But the HIV is like put aside. It's just who has it, it got the information, who doesn't has the information about others, but not HIV. Why? Are people afraid to speak, still ashamed to speak about something that all of us are at risk? It's like all of us, it's not just a certain groups, all of us. If you don't talk about it, we carry on being at risk. And if they want to cut the number of positive, how can they do it if they're not talking to the right people? Because right people are all not gay, not trans, it's all of us.
Can I ask, after getting your diagnosis, like obviously we see loads of things like in the news about cancer, heart disease, COVID, all these things. And you can say before as well, like, did you ever feel that there was enough information out there anyway to begin with? And then after getting your diagnosis as well, what was that feeling there like? Because we've spoken about there should be more stuff out there. I did need to know that, blah, blah, blah. How did you feel after the diagnosis, knowing that it's not that mainstream, it's not big in the news, it's not big out there, that information is not readily available? Did that sit with you differently?
Anna, do you want to answer that?
You want to answer, Yvonne?
No, you can answer first,
Okay.
and then I'll give you.
That was a very good question, Chantal. Thanks for that, because actually, I feel the information is there, is a solid information, it's very valuable, is there. But the only problem is not reaching the negative people, is only reaching those who are already positive. And that's the main problem. There's not much mainstream on tellies. I remember just recently about the HIV testing week, that someone, I don't remember, it was streamed on BBC or IT, I don't remember which channel. And then they just cut it down about the HIV testing. I was like, what? No way. That's not right. They need to talk about that. This week is the HIV test week, is free, go and get tested. Actually, I managed to have 2 friends of mine tested on that week. I sent, one of them bought it, asked it as well. But up to now, it sat on a desk and she's afraid to do the test. Wow. Yes, she's afraid to do. One, she did it voluntarily. The other one, I helped her. And the other one is still afraid to do. I'm like, why? It's because that this information that is so valuable is not reaching the negative people. It's only like, somehow, it's like now being HIV positive. And because I'm so involved with this HIV talk, you know, in conference events, and I'm like, say a UK cab member, a BIVA, like I'm helping, like writing the pregnancy guidelines for HIV positive women. And there's so much information out there, but it's only within our close circle. It's like almost I've got like a double life now, you know? It's like I'm Anna, the one that I've always met, no and none. And now I'm Anna with an HIV positive diagnosis. And that shouldn't be overlap. That should be just a one. I'm just one person that unfortunately now is living with HIV. But I still feel I'm Anna and I've got the HIV. It's like almost like 2 people in just one body. I don't know how to put that in a way that you could, you know, totally easily understand.
I totally understand. Totally understand. Because that is how we live. That is what happens to you. Because there is a fear of how people are going to respond to you. You live your life in secrecy. You have to select people who you tell, because it's not just that we internalize the stigma. We are aware that it exists out there. So we are aware that we can lose our jobs, lose housing, you lose friends, you lose family. So you have to become very careful about who knows. So I've always said my biggest pain is at the moment of diagnosis for most people, if they are told they have a long-term or even a life-threatening condition, at that point, they are reaching out to professionals and family and friends for support. For us with HIV, the moment we get that, we have to learn to be silent. That is where the separation begins. Yeah.
But at the same time, Yvonne, it's like, I've got a heart condition. I can say a few close friends and my family, they know I've got a heart condition, but not all my friends or acquaintances, they know I've got a heart condition. But because of this stigma, the way they, you know, HIV is still seen nowadays, I feel the need to come forward, to be visible and to tell, yes, I've got this, I've got HIV. But still, I don't go around and say, I've got a heart condition. So why that needs to be different? Why HIV is put on like in a kind of a box kind of thing, that to be able to have all these treatment, the care that you normally should have, like you've got a condition, you need to, you need to almost like fighting for it. It shouldn't be. It should just be seen like, you've got diabetes, you've got cancer, you've got heart condition, because I'll go for my checks for heart condition every 2 years. Okay, stable. I don't need to take any medication, but I still need to go for my checks. I go for HIV every 6 months, and it's okay. I'm undetectable. That we might come to that later. So why it needs to be put in that way? And this is where we need to, be the voice of those who don't have a voice, and talk till it's seen like, as in terms of medical side of the profession, medical side of it, as a condition, chronic condition like any other. Although, in terms of feelings, the way, special to me is more how it happened, rather than the illness, the virus itself.
Hiya. There's so much there. I think the first bit is like, as women, where do we learn about sex? Because it's that whole notion about talking about sex. Where do we learn about sex? Who do we talk to about sex? From being a young age to even like, growing up and in the spaces that we're in now.
Yeah, I agree. Because it's funny, because I watch myself on the video, and even then and now I still look back and I still have these images of the Garden of Eden, and these famous type Botticelli type paintings of Adam and Eve running out the Garden of Eden and nakedness. I think that's the first time you get a sense of shame about being naked, that kind of biblical link, and that sense of we were perfect and then we've done something wrong. And then it starts like a ping pong, because you start doing we were perfect, then we discovered we were naked. It's like kids, well, if you hadn't vet the apple, then we wouldn't have. But I also get that sense of, it's like women are blamed. We are inferior and we are blamed for the life humans have. If you take the biblical stance, the life that we have is less than perfect because of something she did. And there isn't anything said specifically in the Bible other than you hear and remember the searing punishment that was put on women. You will have children in pain. Your life will be horrible. So there's a sense of punishment. Now, this is about eating an apple. I don't know how we have over time gone to being punished for the apple to then having sex. And I think that's around our Victorian values, that sex is only for having children. And we live in a world where things are very black and white. So what happens if you don't want to have children? What happens to the sex then?
Yeah, and sex being about pleasure. At what point do we learn about that? Because if we're learning that sex is about procreation, not only like you're saying, in like sacred texts or whatever, but in school or even like with your peers or at home, at what point do we understand that it's about pleasure?
But also, we've mentioned it before in the previous video, a pleasure for women.
For women, yeah.
Yeah, because I heard about orgasm.
Yeah.
And I thought, I heard about it and I keep seeing on the TV that it's supposed to be really great, but I didn't know where to go to find out this information. And I wonder how much of what we learn as women is rehashed trash, or how many of us actually have sit down and talk about, or are we always just laughing that dirty laugh that we're supposed to laugh when we talk about sex? And there's an assumption that we know. and we all laugh as if we know. So we're
Yeah.
all faking it to make it, but there's not.
Really, there's just no clue.
Yeah, we're all clueless, but faking it and acting as if, because I don't remember many conversations with women of my age about the mechanics of sex. Yeah, and that sounds really clumsy, but I didn't know where to look for good advice or even good pictures, because the nearest I remember laughing about is catalogue, you know, and if you saw a woman's boobs through the bra in the catalogue, you thought that was rude. So I'm just thinking, how do you learn good sex?
Yeah.
And yourself, if the nearest you get to it is a catalogue picture and that's it. And always it's something naughty or forbidden. So again, creates that image always in your mind. It's not something you're supposed to be doing. Okay, that was just one thing, but I think the thing that I just want to flag up is, why are we afraid to test? Because come on, it sounded like a rant and I must have burnt off half your hair. This whole notion about why are we
why are we afraid to test? And as well, so I'm just thinking, like, I was speaking to someone the other day and talking about, you know, going out and testing in the community, and we're talking about entrance points. And yeah, you know, there's the entrance to go in this way, which wouldn't be, you know, the usual way to go into this place. And my thing was, well, you know, they can enter through the same way as everyone else would. But then the question was asked, but what if they didn't want anyone to know that we're testing? So it's that whole thing in, that's what we're trying to do, normalize testing, because what's wrong with testing? That's the only way to know your status, really. And it could probably be seen as a turn on to know that this person knows their status and, you know, they're in charge of the sexual health and going to take the test and all this sort of stuff, like the looking about the body. So I've just gone off on one then, haven't I?
It's a good flip.
Yeah.
We have sex. We have sex. The whole notion that it's something consciously that we're going into, consciously that we want. It's kind of something we switch off the light and it's happening in the dark. And again, that sense of it's something that we're not supposed to be doing. And so how can you become healthy about your sex if you know nothing about it and you don't even look at yourself while you're doing it? We can't even physically see ourselves if it's in the dark. I remember laughing because the whole notion of having fun while you're having sex, instead of it being something that you have to get through, that made me laugh, because that, Chantel, it takes a whole re-education of your brain, all the things that you've ever been taught about being restrictive. It would be nice if we flipped the script and people talked about having health checks as easy as we do talk about getting your glasses. The moment your eyesight starts to fade, first thing you think, I need to see an optician. And when it comes to, I think the thing that I worry about is when it comes to sexual health, we can be sat on infections that can be with us for a long time and not connect it to our sexual health, or we can pass them on to our children without realizing. And most of the sexually transmitted infections can be dealt with these days, and even HIV is still a long-term manageable condition. So we can protect our bodies and our health and protect future generations just by flipping how we talk about our health. What do you think?
Yeah, I agree with you. So I'm just going to go off on one again as well. With the whole sex being done to us as well. So we touched on it anyway, like talking about the whole pleasure thing, but sex being done to us. And did you say something about, can I say no?
Yeah, I did.
Can I say no? Like,
Is it okay?
that whole thing in consent.
And I still think we're not taught it.
No, we're not taught it, because obviously if we're taught that it's about procreation, then, and even if you didn't even want a child, like, who's got the upper hand here, and why has somebody got the upper hand here? How is this a healthy relationship? What's
Yeah.
healthy about that? There's no pleasure, there's no consent, there's no conversation about, do you even want children? Like, it's just all a bit.
Well, it's so long-term learned, because I was also just thinking for lads, how do they know? So how do they say no to a woman? Because then isn't it deemed as unmanly? How do they know that if a woman's saying yes means yes, no means no, and play safe? How do we as women not feel that we have to, and therefore we say yeah right up until the last minute? And that's what I'm saying about, we haven't learned conversations about sex, and I was never so confident about my body that I could have that conversation. I didn't know that I didn't have that much advocacy, and I don't believe life has changed that much, but I want it to change. Yeah, because I think to truly be in control means that you could stand and have that, or sit and have a conversation about sex before the height of passion, because you don't want to kill the passion, but in some ways it's being confident to have the discussion and understand what the boundaries are before you go. Because I think when it comes to sex and relationships, we buy first and then check the goods later. What they call it, buyer's remorse, that we get into the relationship and then start regretting, and it can take some of us, it always takes me years to get out of a bad relationship, because I've already entwined and double tangled myself into a place that I can't get out of, or that is unhealthy, or a lot of the time we're not mature enough to manage. I think there's a whole emotional maturity that we should be practicing before we go in.
But it all stems back to as well, where do you learn about this? Where,
I know now that I started to look harder. I mean, I demonized the internet for so many things, so many things, but I would like to see more conversations and more resources on, and more videos. And I don't mean, because I think that's porn works because it's very visual and there is no need to, as you can see, but it describes a type of sex that most of us don't engage in. I remember after my diagnosis, I wanted to learn how to have safe sex as a positive woman with a negative man. And I managed to find a website, Jo Cox. So she talks about, it's a sex website in as much as she sells sex toys and how to use them. So I had to open my mind to all of that. But also there were very interesting videos about how to use the toys well or how not to use them well. And then getting onto websites like NAM that talk about what is high risk, what's low risk. But I would like not to read it, but to be able to sit with somebody as a positive woman or as a positive man or as a negative person and be able to say, I've met someone, they've told me they're positive. What does that mean for us when we're having sex? Because no one has the conversation with you.
No one has that conversation with you.
Yeah, and we're supposed to just figure it out. And I think I think sometimes we can be rejected by people who are negative because they are afraid not only of our being HIV positive, even when we say we're undetectable, it's about not having the confidence to have that conversation. So what does that mean for us
when we have sex? What can we do? Can't we do? What's in and what's out? The answer may be that there is nothing. If you're undetected, you can do everything. But I think it's nice to be able to have the conversation. I want to be able to ask, and I want to be able to explore. And I find more often than not, I don't know where to begin. I didn't even know. And if you're dysfunctional, if sex isn't good anymore, being referred to sex therapists as well would be great.
Gonna go off on one here now, aren't we? So, could you just say in as well, what, because we're going back to why are we afraid to test anyway here as well? Is it that whole notion of getting a reactive result? What do I do with that? Where's that information? Blah, blah, blah. Or the whole stigma in, like, remember we were saying in the last part, the ew sort of thing, or just why would I need to test it? It's got nothing to do with me. Like that does not affect me.
That's interesting. Why are we afraid to test? I think when I tested because I expected the test to be negative. So I did it just as a matter of, it won't happen to me. And seeing as you're testing for this lot, just test for that lot. And just see, in my mind, it doesn't happen to women, and it's happening over there to those groups. And so the test wasn't about the HIV, it was just a tick box exercise. I think if it had been just HIV that I was going to test for, I wouldn't have tested because I didn't want the answer.
Okay. But because you was testing for everything, you just
said, yeah. And I think
always test for everything. Yeah.
It makes sense to test for everything because you could be positive. It could be wrecking your body slowly and you are not aware. So yeah, you test for the chlamydia, gonorrhea, and they all come back positive or negative and you deal with that, but you still always got one under the carpet that you're not dealing with. And my experience is such that the longer I left it, the more it was destroying my immune system. I wasn't registering that not dealing with it had its own consequence. And really, the meds are so good now that before it starts damaging your immune system, you can take the meds and they will keep your immune system intact so that you do not die. But I think we are afraid to test because it's like that whole Garden of Eden thing. You become woke and that means you've got to deal. Well, you don't have to. You become woke to the knowledge. When we don't test, we are also protected by, in theory, the law, because to be positive, you're supposed to be disclosing to people about your status. There is a pressure that is put on you that you feel like you have to walk around telling everybody, I've got HIV, I've got it, and definitely with your sexual partners. The way, by criminalizing it, what happened was people understood that if you don't test, you're not liable. So it allows you to be ignorant, and it allows you then, to be complicit. If I don't ask, if we don't ask each other in the heat of the moment, then it doesn't matter. And I think to know that people can be potentially criminalized doesn't make people want to know their state. And I think you have to take the criminalization off and make testing for HIV the same as all STIs so that people test. But it also means that each individual becomes responsible for their own body.
Yeah.
Not ask and then blame, or you can't ask and assume that the answer that you are given is honest. People tell lies for 1,000 reasons, for blinking, non-payment of rent, we take 3p off in the shop, dodge pay. There are so many things in relationships, let alone in life, that we are not honest about, and yet to criminalize this section, intimate relationships, means that we are less likely, because the punishment for not being honest is high. But as I've said, it also means that those who are negative can put their head in their sand and not look after their own health, not ask questions, not get tested regularly, because they will assume that the other person has done it, the same way that men assume that the women are responsible for contraception. It's her job. That's the woman's job. She's the one that's got to carry the child. So becoming proactive in your own sexual health takes a rethink of your body and how society looks at us, in my opinion. But again, I got there because I acquired HIV, so I've had to rethink.
Thank you, Yvonne. Can I move on? I'm just thinking of anything else that I wanted to discuss. Should we continue?
Yeah, let's continue, because I am always conscious of time.
And that's where it's, you know, it was very painful. And it's something that, to be honest, I don't think that I'll be able to talk so freely about that as I'm talking about the, you know, HIV itself, because I still have loads to manage, and, you know, it's a kind of a healing process, and I don't really, you know, want to deal with that now. And it's like my journey is like, you know, there's two sides of it, doing the virus and doing the, you know, how it happened, you know, how that made me feel as a person, the pain that is caused me, to my family, you know, to my children, to my friends. And
Is that also because you're talking about, I talked about it in terms of telling and not telling, and the fear from society. But you're right, because there is also the emotional side. And what worries me in terms of society, and it's just my personal opinion, is we don't get counselling. Enough of us don't get counselling. Counselling exists if you go to a specialist, but we don't have all counsellors trained to manage someone who presents with HIV. So you have a bottleneck in terms of people trying to access counselling and support, and a lot of us can fall by the wayside. There isn't also a way to manage the relationship that you were in at the time you found out about your diagnosis. For some of us, we are with a partner who does or doesn't tell us. It may have been that partner, you could have caught it at a different time, but how you process relationships, how you process that relationship, how you move forward, don't move forward. It's a long-term condition, but still the stigma with it impacts all of your life, and it's being given the time to process. So I'm also saying that we could do with scaling up the mental health impact of an HIV diagnosis, so that we are mentally and emotionally able to process and to heal from what is, for a lot of us, a traumatic event. And I don't think that's recognized.
Yes, to me, Yvonne, it's like, it's not as much about what people think about myself. Because if I put it in that way, say, I've only known that I'm Black, you know, and I've been like, you know, mostly back in Portugal. I was, you know, growing up, like I had like some kind of racism comments towards myself. But no, I'm so proud to be Black. This is me, you know. If I wasn't Black, that wasn't not going to be the person that I am today. And I've dealt with it like in, I think I've dealt with it quite well. And I never let those kind of people tell me any different, that I'm not who I am. So I feel like the HIV diagnosis is the same. I couldn't put it that way. I'm not saying, so I don't want to come across like as, I don't know, but this is the way I see it, because I'm proud. I'm not saying that I'm proud to have HIV. No, I'm not saying that. But yes, this is me with an HIV diagnosis. Wasn't about what people think about me, was more, as I said, how it happened and dealing with that, because it was more, mentally, I was mentally drained. And, Maria, she can, my friend, she even didn't realize that I was depressed. No one realized that I was depressed, because you can mask these things.
Yeah.
And it's just how that affected me personally, rather than what people gonna think about me. Okay. Because I can control their minds. You can please everyone. If you just live your life trying to please everyone, honestly, you're not going anywhere. And to be honest, the mental side of it, I've got like in my family, illness, mental illness. And I've always been the one like who supported them. And to put myself in a position that I needed the support and I needed to back up and tell them, look, I can no longer help you now, because now this is my me time. And I needed, to come off and like say, now because Maria, she knows I always put my family first. And now there was the time where I needed to be first in order to help them. And that also, the HIV diagnosis affected my family in that way, because I was always there for them. And I couldn't, be in the way, I never left them, but not in the same, way that I've always helped them. And it really affected me as well. And at the time, they didn't even know that I was HIV positive, and they couldn't understand why I was, acting differently. So it's more about how I felt with that diagnosis rather than what people's are gonna say. So this is, this is my journey, my story, and I can narrate it the way I want, because this has happened to me. I felt it, so it's my time. And I want people that have got this diagnosis to understand that it's hard. It's hard. It takes time. It doesn't matter how long it's going to take. You take your time, 1, 2, 5, 10, 20 years, as long as in the end of it, you will overcome all your fears. If it's anything, it's possible to be happy again. But as you said, I think the mental side of it, the support, counseling is very, very important. And unfortunately, it's still something that is not seen as, a priority when you got this diagnosis. And
sorry, just cut you off, Yvonne. After the diagnosis and mental health, we've already discussed mental health on a previous speakeasy within Black communities, and the stigmas around that. So just thinking of that as a layer on top of now this other layer of receiving your diagnosis and that trauma and how it's impacted you. And if there's no one to talk to, no family, no friends, no counselling, where does that put you?
In a very dark place. And I think the thing that Maria's talking about is your family can witness your behaviour changing and not have a clue. And you can be struggling and cannot say, because, as I've said, in the midst of the coming to terms with the diagnosis, your fear is, if I tell you, will you stand by me? And your silence is a way of continuing to get the care that you need at the time, because the fear, if I reach out and you reject me, I then am alone with it. Whereas at least I can walk amongst and be amongst you, as much as I'm struggling, but at least I don't have that layer of ostracism to deal with, or finger pointing, or whispering that we are good at. It's hard. You're already struggling, and it's a layer that you really don't need. I think suicidal is possible, because I think the isolation and the sense of shame is enough to push anyone off the edge. When Maria talks, she talks about community, and when it comes to racism, if you're a person of colour, you live with a community and you have a history that teaches us how to manage racism. And we have our cultural icons that remind us of what we have overcome. So there is a shared history and a sense that you don't walk alone, you're one amongst many in the fight against, and we sing the songs that remind us that we are more than our colour. When it comes to HIV, there is no history, and so you have nothing to fall back on. And it makes it difficult for you to see yourself or value yourself or hold your emotional, psychological well-being together, because you sit in the blackness of it all with nothing but historic fear running around, and negative videos, negative information, and a sense of with no one to talk to and counsel you out of the darkness. It's understandable, not right, but you can see people being pushed off the edge. And I measure it against the COVID response, that people recognize quickly the impact of COVID and just having to stay physically indoors all the time. And yet the recognition about the mental impact of a HIV diagnosis requires that we live inside of ourselves all the time, and not being able to reach out. Incredibly difficult, which is why being able to connect with individuals or with charities, organizations, specialists that coach you out of the negative that you believe about yourself into a positive, having a mentor so that you learn how to live with HIV and live well, is incredibly important. So I cannot underplay how important it is and how I struggled with it.
I mean, that's why it's so important as well for, services like George House Trust to, be offering these support services and stuff, but just think about, people who might have received that diagnosis and aren't accessing George House Trust. They don't know about George House Trust, or they just think it's not for them, or, slips through the net, whatever. Like, we're talking about these people as well, and we're talking about that trauma and masking that depression and living alone. Even though they might have a community around them anyway, they're still living with that diagnosis alone in that isolation.
And yeah, because you could be a man with loads of kids, woman. A lot of the women are mothers, so they're still running households. Maria's there running households. I still have my. We can still be amongst people and be alone and figuring out or trying to figure out who's got it. Not having people to help you come to terms with can turn to anger, depressions. And I think looking at George House Trust as just an organisation for gay men does a disservice to gay men, what they've achieved with George House Trust, but also the fact that it's for more than gay men, transgender, Black community, any person of colour. George Trust does not discriminate or draw a line under who can turn up. Once you are diagnosed, the support is there. And I think the important thing is that you will see lots of people who are diagnosed from such a wide, diverse background that it helps you to contextualize, put into context your situation. You are not alone. This isn't just happening to you. Lots of people from different backgrounds to yourself, also similar to yourself, people who you think you would know, don't know. And I can't reiterate, it is a safe space. So for once, you can go somewhere where you can talk about your status, talk about HIV, talk about how you're feeling, or not, but you can do that with people who truly understand where you're coming from. And I know from experience that George House works really hard at trying to give you the support. So for some people, it has included immigration, financial issues, counselling is available, opportunities to socialise, or some opportunities to socialise and not talk about HIV. But I think, looking back on my journey, it was important to reach out. And if we can't go to George House Trust, then we should be asking as a community, what safe space are we creating for ourselves, where we look at our sexual health, and not only to manage our sexual health, but be able to tell ourselves or others, or at least create a generation that don't have it as something that's just under the carpet. We are capable of managing our sexual health, but we've got to stop being afraid of it.
Just how bit thingy, kind of like a positive that kind of came out of that diagnosis there when Anna was speaking was prioritizing herself over others. Like,
yeah,
that's not what we do, is it? We have this conversation so much, but to prioritize yourself over others, like having, you know, that HIV diagnosis was kind of like, you know, a wake-up call of like, wait a minute, you've got to look after yourself here now and kind of put these things down that you're doing for other people.
And so difficult to do, because I mean, tell, that's still kind of, it's still hard for me to do, because going out there spreading the word, you're right, when it hit me, when I got my diagnosis, it hit me like an Arctic with wings, turbo, right? And I closed down, but now I'm woke to my status and the things that I've learned about myself. And the number one lesson was self-care. But self-care is also about valuing myself as enough. I have a history, and as Black women, we have a history of being strong Black women who have put the world on our backs and carried and carried and carried. So that legacy has served us, but also doesn't serve us. And I think when I see so many of us, the thing that I would want is for us to learn, what does self-care look like, but how can I create that balance between looking after my partner, my children, my community, without burning out myself.
Yeah.
And because I think if it wasn't HIV, I would have burnt out with something else, because we fear standing still. I don't even think we fear it. I don't think we know that we exist to just exist, or have the right to just be okay.
Just be, rather than always having something to do.
Ilana Van Zandt said, I think it's one of the podcasts I listened to, and she was talking about when you don't value yourself, you spend your life proving to people that you have a right to take up space. And we often do that by overcommitting, overscheduling, overworking. So I had to ask myself, is everything I do about a subconscious begging for approval? And I think Oprah talks about the disease to please. And I would want us as a community, as women, as men, to check in on what narratives what shadow narratives are in our brains that we're running with and not even aware of, and can we change them, bring them, call them out into the open and ask, can we change this now? Is it still serving us?
Yeah. Thank you. And thank you for sharing some of your experiences there as well, because, you know, for me as well, when you do go in and you do take your test, you're always thinking, yeah, my result's got to be negative, you know, so that's just what you're thinking it when you're going in. You're not going in thinking, oh my God, you know, my result's going to come back as reactive, that I'm going to be, you know, living with HIV. That's not. So, you know, another reason why it is important to go and take your test, regardless of what you think. It's about going out and getting a definite answer and just understanding what's going on with your body and taking care of yourself.
I think, yeah, taking care of yourself, but I think we can do better. These support organisations, it's about understanding that the person will be in shock and there will be a lot of fear. And so we've discussed briefly a toolkit. What am I leaving that person with that they can look at, that time to kind of get their head round? And I stress, and I can't stress enough, it must be hopeful, full of hope. There needs to be images of children, of men, of women who live well with HIV, because that has to counter the very negative, everyone dies who has HIV. It has to have information about the medication, so that people understand it has moved beyond AZT, how much it's changed, what are the side effects, and really good information about medication, because we have a history with drugs that is fear-based.
Yeah.
We have to live with this medication for the rest of our lives. And I know that in some communities, and in our communities, we would do anything but take long-term medication. So it's about being able to have the discussion about the drugs, and about what alternatives we think are out there. I always think videos are good because it just requires you to look, but testimonies, videos, it's a resource that a person newly diagnosed should be able to be given. And then also all the charities that are out there, because they don't have to just go to George House Trust, but it's knowing where to go when they're ready and where to get good information to read. And that's something that I'd like to see developed for our community.
Definitely. Thank you, Yvonne. I'm going to press play.
Okay.
Yeah.
So I'd like to actually, Claire, you as a health professional, what we just said about, you know, the support, not just like you can have like a peer mentor, someone's got the same diagnosis as yourself, but, you know, the counseling, how do you think that will, you know, help, you know, an HIV positive person?
I think as a healthcare professional and being HIV negative, I can never truly put myself into your shoes, Anna, and Yvonne's. And I think what's so difficult is I think the mental health aspect and the internalized stigma and the stigma that, you know, sometimes you face in society. Well, when I say sometimes, probably all the time. And then you come into hospital for something, I don't know, you break your leg, you know, and then on top of that, you're getting stigma again, possibly. And I think it's so, I don't think I could ever put into context how underplayed mental health is needed. So obviously, if I can use Yvonne as an example, when you come in as a patient, say it was that you broke your leg, and to me, you're Yvonne first, and you're a dog owner, you're a mother, you're a carer, you're a Black woman, an empowering, powerful Black woman. You're interested in this, this, and this, and you're also a woman living with HIV. And that is how it needs to be viewed by healthcare professionals. And I think you touched on it, Anna. You said it needs to be alongside, oh, this person has diabetes, this person has a heart condition, this person has HIV, and it needs to just be normalized. It needs to just be just speaking, just saying the word HIV needs to be as normal as saying diabetes. And I think like Biva do, like, you know, this kind of, I think it's so kind of, the message is it needs to be holistic management. Anybody who is living with HIV needs to be treated. The HIV related part of their kind of self needs to be treated, obviously, but then the HIV non-related needs to be treated alongside that. So the stigma, this internalized stigma, the kind of everything that makes that person have lesser health outcomes, you know, for social economic changes, biopsychosocial reasons, you know, poor income, everything needs to be addressed. And I think what's very, very difficult is that we all have a specialism in something. So I might see a patient and my specialism, and then I think, oh no, like I don't really know much about mental health. I don't really know much about the medical side. I don't really blah, 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 blah. And it's getting that integrated therapy, so a little bit from everybody can come together and make that person feel, I feel like I'm better managing my HIV, you know. And I think the mental health aspect needs to be so much more work on that. And I think it's coming up with the way that as healthcare professionals we can deliver that wholesome, and you don't have to go to all these little things. You don't have to go to counselling, you don't have to go to here, you don't have to. And I think the funding is a huge part of that. You know, I think it massively depends on your postcode and where you live. If you live in between two kind of major cities, there is nothing available for you. You know, George House Trust are brilliant, and Zahir House and BHA and all these kind of community-based things. And it's just the funding aspect. And I hate that it comes down to that. Everybody has the equal right to have this mental health input, if that makes sense. But I think the non-HIV related kind of things like the mental health aspect, we just need to concentrate on. I think it's a shame. It's a shame that the scientific part of it is so advanced, but I almost feel like we're not up there yet. Do you feel the same? Is that how you feel the support is?
I think where you are in terms of the point of diagnosis over time changes. So you may think you're managing it, but actually you're not. We still got people who don't talk about it, not just because it's society and it's shameful, but because to talk about it means you have to acknowledge it's happening to you. You have HIV and all of that brings. And again, when you ask, well, why? There is so much shame loaded with it. So how do you manage that? And and Anna's right when she says the impact is more than you, because we have young children born with it who take the diagnosis and then take the shame as well. And it's not treated like a medical condition. It's something that you feel blamed for, or that you were bad or you did wrong. And so we've got to get it past that, because what happens when you get the diagnosis is you're spending a lot of time processing the shame and trying to figure out, what did I do to deserve this? And HIV isn't about deserving it. It's just like diabetes, like anything else. I wanted to say, depending on how old you are, can also have an impact on how you're treated. I was diagnosed really early on when it was first recognized. So I still walk with a memory of the very real fear that was out there. And the only way I can get people to understand how it was for me is to tell people that for me, the diagnosis came, it's the equivalent of the same time COVID did. So we've all gone through COVID. We all know what it was like when COVID first came out. When we first heard it, you heard the government response. You know how you individually felt about COVID and how we all started coping. That was HIV for me. That was the time I got my diagnosis. So I lived in amongst, around, living, breathing the fear Now the fear hasn't gone, although the medication has changed, but my fear and my internalized stigma of HIV has stayed with me. And I've had to do work with organizations like George House Trust to turn that around inside of me, and then do the work of changing people's perspectives and attitudes outside, and healthcare professionals. As people who work with people who have HIV, if there was a takeaway that you could give to friends and family, Mena or Claire, as a professional, what would you say? Because you live with us, you work with us. How do we make it more comfortable? I don't want to feel I have to make it more comfortable because I can't pass my HIV on. But how do we begin as friends and family or as working professionals to make it easier to be more comfortable with HIV? And what support do you give somebody who has it?
First of all, I think we should be talking more about HIV. It's like I said, it has been put on the background. It is that doesn't help, you know. People still out there every single day, millions of people are getting the HIV, are being tested positive. But because it's like the way everything started, there is a shame attached to it, and it shouldn't, because to be honest with you, what I think now is the society has to be blamed, because this disease has been around 40 plus years, and they haven't done a big a knowledge of it, passing on to knowledge that is been there out there to everybody. So the person shouldn't be ashamed of their diagnostic, you know. They should be talking as well, as positive and as negative people. We should be talking about it. And by talking about it, we're going to normalize these. And this is, I feel ashamed as well, because I have this knowledge and I never spoke about it to my kids. I have a 23 years old son, and I never spoke to him about it. Why I never spoke about it? Because it's related to sex, but sex education, they are giving in school. So why, as a parent, we don't start for a little group, our group inside? And, you know, if you talk to them, incentivize them to talk to their peers, and their peers to talk more people. And this is the way it should be, half grown, you know. But no, everybody is ashamed to speak about it. We are ashamed to speak about something that we do,
Yeah.
you know.
Exactly.
And that's the problem. That's the big problem. It's not blaming you, me, or it's all of us. We have failed. Yes, because we don't talk about it. And I think I want to make a difference. I want to talk about it, because look, I had when I was 18, I was raped, but I wasn't ashamed to talk about it, because I didn't want others to go through what I did. And I just spoke about it, and others came forward and say, yes, it happened to me. The same person did this to me. And because because if they had come forward and say it, maybe it wouldn't happen to me. So for me, this is the same. Okay. If I'm positive because I don't know how I get it, doesn't matter, but I'm positive. If I have the knowledge, why not pass on to others? If you pass on to others, you are making the difference. Don't be ashamed. Just speak about it. And that's my opinion.
It's lovely. To be quite honest, I think a lot of people think, yeah, talking about it is huge. That's the start.
Yeah.
But it's not about everyone going out there with a banner. Not everyone has to or want to, but I think it's brilliant, because you're right, the conversation can start at home. Because if you haven't talked to your son, how does he understand how to protect himself when he's out there? And I know as parents, we protect them from everything else. We would. And yet the most intimate thing, it's a conversation that is
Exactly.
worth having, no matter how much he squirms, how much they squirm. I have had the conversation with my son because I needed him to understand about sex. And I now talk about sex in terms of choices. And I want him to see me as a healthy woman with HIV, not someone who's sickly. But I also want him to understand that in all health conditions, people can live well or not. So I don't have to pretend I'm happy every day. He understands it just as a health condition, not the stigma. He's aware that it's there, but he sees me first. Claire, how can we help health professionals? Because health professionals are people too. What could I do to make a health professional more, it's not more comfortable, but how do we get the message to health professionals? Because you're talking about a holistic approach as well. They may turn around and just say, we haven't got the time. If we could do one thing for health professionals, how could we make HIV more accessible for them?
It's a difficult question because I was thinking about this yesterday, and I was thinking, I take the responsibility for making any of my patients feel comfortable. So what I do impacts on that patient. So I would never expect anybody, living with HIV or otherwise, to change their approach to make my job easier. I need to change. So I was sat for about an hour and I was trying to come up with the thing, what I expect from you. And I just cannot. I need to change. As healthcare professionals, we need to change. And I think a huge part of that is language. So one word that I can say to, say, yourself, Yvonne or Anna, can stay with you for the rest of your life. It may prevent you from coming back to hospital ever. So that onus is on me. And it's not for you to make me feel comfortable. It's for me to make you feel comfortable. And I think words are so powerful, and I think it has the kind of the power to empower somebody, to kind of uplift somebody, to kind of change somebody, but at the same time it can stigmatize somebody and it can hurt somebody, and it can be. I just think it's on me, and I think it's on us as healthcare professionals to make you feel that we are open, that we are safe. You are safe within my care. You are not going to be stigmatized. You are visible. You count. Every little bit of you is a whole person, and the HIV is a tiny, tiny, tiny amount, which I will try to help you with. And I think a lot of it comes down to every contact counts, which is something NHS England run. And it's a campaign that basically helps to kind of move towards a positive behaviour change. And done well, it doesn't impact on my busy workload. It doesn't mean I have to spend an hour with somebody as opposed to 15 minutes. It means that I have the skills to say, you have the skills to, kind of deal with this better yourself. You are the person. I want to empower you that you have the skills and the tools in your own kind of life toolbox. I don't have to give it to you, do you know? But yeah, it's a difficult question. I think it's about being open, about talking about it freely, but listening to Anna's experience and yourself, Yvonne's, I don't know what that feels like, and I can't even sit here and say I pretend to know what that feels like. I've got a lot of experience, a hell of a lot of experience, but I am not you. Do you know what I mean? So how
Dun, dun, dun. There was a lot in there, and I didn't want to add more to that chunk as well, because I know that we will be having another part of this. So yeah, that comparison when you were talking about the time of diagnosis and it being pretty much very raw and very current, at the moment, and, you know, new, and with what's going on in the tabloids and, you know, in the community to do with HIV, like comparing it to basically when COVID, you know, first came out and stuff. It kind of makes me understand it a bit more. A lot of people keep talking, I've seen through when we've spoken as well, it keeps coming up, a lot of talking about HIV to HIV negative people. That keeps coming up. That needs to be something that we do more often, all over. And it is something that, you know, through BHA and even myself, like, you know, in personal conversations when I speak to people and speak about the work that I do and, you know, whatnot, I do have those conversations, but is that enough?
It may not be enough, but I acknowledge that it's a start, because I think what Mena said was, it's 40 years. It's 40 years. There was a lot said and then the story disappeared.
Mm-hmm.
And I think if we come all guns blaring, which we could do, which I think in some ways makes sense, it will, I worry that it will have the wrong effect, that it will antagonize. And that's not because I want to apologize for HIV or what has happened. Society has an outdated view of HIV, but the campaigns that I have seen in terms of getting people to become more aware are those that engage people. And I've always said that the talking about it starts small and then scales up, and that by getting people's curiosity, we can get them to talk, and we have to factor in that they are talking about an uncomfortable subject, something that across the board all of us don't like talking about. And so the images that we create on a mass media campaign, government campaigns, have to normalize and make talking about HIV and sexual health a comfortable thing to do. For some people, HIV needs to be part of a conversation about sexual health, and it's almost like you unpick the onion to go back into the layers. For some people, you start with something light and then bring the conversation in and in. But the active part is the scale of the conversation.
Yeah.
If we continue to do it small, I'm not sure that it will reach enough. And I think if Norman Tebbit were tasked again, the campaign that he did the first time round was huge and it might have felt relentless. It's the same with COVID. You have to make it huge and relentless to change the message. And that investment in the story of HIV now is about updating our knowledge. So we've seen social media, we've seen the TV where, you know, it's about a man who is gay. We need to have now the stories about women who are positive, about children who are positive, a positive superhero, so that people understand that HIV is every walk of life and it's a long-term manageable condition, and we change our mindsets to sex so that we all become our best advocate and we empower both men and women to talk sex and what healthy looks like. So for me, getting HIV out into the community is the work to be done. And even if we start small, I want it, you know, out there in schools. And for our community specifically, it is about very outdated views about sex, and not only having the conversations about where we are now, what we want now, what sex looks like now, and what have we learned from historic, traditional, colonial, parents, friends, and where can we get better, up to date? And then, as we've done with many things, is to change what sex means to me as a Black woman in the 21st century, as a woman in the 21st century. But if there's a narrative about sex for BAME communities, then it's time to start having it.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Did anything else stick out for you there? I think when Marie spoke about of experience of being raped and how that was kind of like a drive for her to speak to others and in a way to like protect others as well. Like she felt like there was that need because maybe if someone had spoke to her or she'd heard that already being, you know, someone being open about it, maybe that would have protected her. Do you feel, you know, similar in terms of having that drive or, you know, passion because of your diagnosis?
Yeah, because I handled it so badly and it was so avoidable. Because of the amount of experiences that you go through. And I think that the word we always use is the processing of the diagnosis at an emotional level. And I know how much we as Black people have to be strong and stoic and in the face of adversity. And so this really strong image where we feel nothing because we keep going on does not prepare you for the juggernaut of a HIV diagnosis and the emotional taxing. So I put myself out there not because I'm better at anybody else at managing it, but because if Harriet Tubman can do, if she can stand up for women, and if we can have the Underground Railroad, and if Maya Angelou, if we've got great sheroes who stand up and say, this is my humanity, then I want to stand up and say, this is my humanity, and it includes my sexuality as well. Because these mistakes were made because we didn't know, I didn't know. I want to be able to bring my humanity to the table, our humanity, and allow people a safe space where they can talk to somebody that they know in the community has HIV but lives well, who they can trust to check in, because in our communities we are very good at passing information, oral knowledge, oral history. We do that with each other, but again, we can sit in silence when it comes to sex, and we will sit in silence when it comes to HIV. And as somebody said, if not me, then who? I am driven by the need to make sure that in our community, there is a who do you turn to about sexual health. And the more people who join me, the better. But at least I'll do the man in the mirror and let it start with me.
Thank you, Yvonne. Thank you. So, anything more to discuss before I wrap up?
No, I think we have given people an absolute ton load. I think they have now to go out and get some rice and peas and chicken. Any chips from Chippy supper tonight? I'm not cooking hot ton down tonight, I tell you. That was a lot. But I want people to go away from this segment, as in all segments, feeling like, okay, she's giving me stuff to think about. And anyone who's out there with a diagnosis, I want you to know that you are not alone. And if there are parents or family and friends who know someone who has the diagnosis and you're not sure how to support them, then contact us at BHA. Like we said, Speak Easy is about that safe place, and we're not just here to talk about it, we're here to support people through the journey. So we hope you've learned lots. I've been honest, and I'm hoping that speaks to your heart. But also, if you have questions and you want to challenge me or Chantel on anything that we've said, then contact us, because we'd love to speak easy. Now take care and stay safe.
Thank you. See you later.
Bye.